Well, thank you and welcome to Composting Climate. Thank you, Sac Green Team and Alchemist CDC, as well as Sacramento County for having me. And so this webinar attempts to teach you how to compost and how important it is for the environment. So thank you for having me. I caught several of you possibly at the Earth Day event with your new kitchen pails. And so that was exciting, and there were quite a nice crowd out there. So first, we're going to talk about the importance of composting, what to compost, methods of composting, and then techniques for healthy soil. And we should have some questions at the end for if you have any, and then of course the GeoBin info once again. So again, my name is David Baker. I am the director of Resoil Sacramento, a community compost network. We work with 24 restaurants and 2 farmers markets where residents bring their scraps. So essentially, we want all the scraps that we can get. Food scraps are the regenerative matter that we need to build up climate resiliency in Sacramento. So that's what we're doing, trying to get everybody to just sequester these, utilize these food scraps in their own yards or in the community to build healthy landscapes. So compost now's the time. There's composting is one of the most important things that we can do to address our changing climate. First, reducing greenhouse gases. So this material is very potent, and that's why we are trying to keep it out of the landfill, because it creates methane. So we can actually do that ourselves by sequestering this carbon, which is our food scraps. So first, reducing greenhouse gases, but more importantly, we want this material to go back into our landscapes, to regenerate our ecosystem and build, as it says, build healthy living landscapes that grow food and climate resilience. So the carbon cycle. So we are all part of the carbon cycle. Carbon is maligned because there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere, but carbon is everything, not everything, but everything natural. So, our fuel, most of our houses, our clothes used to be largely carbon-based. And so it's not that it's bad, but it just needs to be managed correctly and kept out of the atmosphere. So there's that imbalance. So we want to take this carbon and use it to feed our landscape and build our ecosystem. So here's a graphic from the Healthy Soils Initiative, which is California Healthy Soils Initiative, where it shows that healthy soils are equal to an increased soil organic matter. So that's what we have, is our food scraps. And we want to put this organic matter back into our soils. Here are some of the reasons. Improve plant health and yields, to reduce greenhouse gases, water and air quality, water retention. So just healthy soils, healthy living soils just hold many more times more water than just dry, dead soil, as well as erosion and dust. So think of the Dust Bowl. What happened there was they ruined the soil, the topsoil. And then lastly, well, not lastly, but biological diversity and wildlife habitat. So really building our ecosystem. So all this happens just by feeding our soil and putting organic matter into it. So over here, we can see a graphic of a tablespoon of healthy soils. And actually it says, there's various reports, but they say a teaspoon of healthy soil has, let's see what I wrote it down. A teaspoon of rich garden soil can hold up to 1 billion bacteria, several yards of fungal filament, several thousand protozoa, and scores of nematodes. So it's full of life, and we want your food scraps to feed that life. Okay, next, what to compost? So we're looking at essentially two categories of green material and brown material. Both of them are carbon-based, but the brown material down here has more carbon than the high nitrogen material, which is we consider green matter. But foremost, you really need to start with brown matter on hand. So that being a pile of leaves, shredded cardboard, paper towels, used paper towels, hopefully, or a straw bale, which in a lot of cases is what we use at community gardens or urban farms, or even at home. I have straw bales where I may just need that brown material essentially, I'll tell you right now, to cover the green material. So we will use it to build and mix with, but always will want to cover this material pretty well with brown, like leaves and straw. So the green material up here, vegetable scraps, eggshells, coffee grounds. Coffee grounds is not green, and it's not as highly putrescible as most of the other stuff. So, rot, banana peel, a lot of fruit flies and things are going to, want to accumulate around that. Whereas coffee grounds, sometimes we might use this material, either mixing it right in, or maybe to save it and spritz some on the top, just as a little, a barrier, just in case, because it won't draw flies, for instance. But either way, we're going to, so I might spritz it with coffee grounds and then cover it well with straw. So while fruit flies, may get on here, if you just cover it up with the straw, a good layer, that will mitigate that. Next, let's see. What not to compost. So we say NIMBY, not in your backyard. And so these things are compostable, but more in an industrial facility. So we really don't want them in your backyard, or generally in the community gardens. A little bit will be okay, and it's not going to ruin the composting process. It just might bring vectors and things, searching things out. A permaculture teacher mentioned, if you start to compost a lot of meat, you're going to want a lot of, maggots. And so because we don't, to help facilitate that, well, we don't want that necessarily. So we will avoid the meats. Oily foods don't compost as quickly. They don't break down. As well, we don't like these compostable bags per se. I'm afraid of the PFAS chemical that may be used in them. So usually I avoid them, or take them out when we get them from residents. They do break down, but again, I don't really want that material in there, in my soil. And then weeds and diseased plants. So just to make sure the weed seeds of this dandelion may not get killed fully. So you may be spreading dandelions, which, better or worse. Other weeds, seeds, a lot of weeds, if they could go down, like grass clippings, obviously. If they haven't gone to seed, we throw them into the compost. But otherwise, I will save them for the county to take away generally. There are methods if you really want to keep everything on your property. I've learned of a few methods to kill those, but not in your hot compost pile, for instance, or our compost piles. Also, wine corks, I think the county wants them, but their special property is they don't really break down, and they inhibit the microorganisms from breaking them down. So I don't recommend them. Those, however, if you did throw them into your compost pile, you would just see them at the end. They just wouldn't break down. It wouldn't be a problem otherwise. as well. So things that are not compostable, things that shouldn't go in the county's bucket or your backyard, would be things like plastic, rocks, glass, metal, and things like that. Especially plastic. That's probably the main contaminant. So now we are moving on to methods of composting. I remind people that it's not an exact science, or even compost happens. Nature makes it happen. So we just have to fit it to your context and just mitigate any problems that may occur. So depending on your context, depends see how one or all of these methods may work for you. I'm going to talk about vertical composting in a pile. Secondly, horizontal composting, which is we call sheet composting, and then vermiculture, which is composting with worms. So first, hot composting, or vertical composting, as we might call it, is building a pile, generally a cubic yard, tall and wide. So a mass of 1 cubic yard is what is really going to heat this up. The mass of the material is going to fuel the metabolic activity of the organisms inside. So that's, it's not the sun or any other alternative heat source, but rather just the microorganisms interacting with the green, the green material and the brown material, is going to start breaking it down and heat the pile up potentially to 160 degrees, which just means it's happening really fast. There's a lot of life in there. And at a certain point, and this is often debated, every YouTube or book I read says a little bit different. There's a different prescription. But for me, every 4 days to 7 days would be ideal to turn this pile to give it air. And so we're going to basically, if you are using a geo bin, we would take this bin and maybe pull it off over this pile and move it to here. So it would be or over here, maybe, where it would be empty. You can also dismantle it and just take it apart, unwrap it, and then put it back together right next to it. And from there, generally, we will start to turn it into the other pile. And that really, like I say, is just providing air to these microbes, who are then going to heat the pile up, but continue to keep the pile hot. If you don't turn it, however, the microbes could tend to go anaerobic at some point, generally starting on the bottom. It's a very organic process. So it kind of falls into itself and loses air along the bottom. And so there it's going to slow down. So that's why we turn it, like I say, 4 to 7 days. What we're ultimately trying to achieve is this balance of nitrogen, carbon, air, and water. So that how we build this pile, as you can see this illustration, generally it's good they say to put twigs in there for air circulation, but then you'll start with a layer of green material, a layer of brown material, layer of green, brown, all the way to the top. On top, of course, is a strong layer of brown material just to cover it up. Potentially a carbon filter, if you will. This is one of our community gardens, which is actually a 5-bin system built to be, a cubic yard in mass. And here you can see Kat and Chris turning it, and it's just steaming profusely, which is a lot of fun. It's very exciting, but also it could be, like I say, especially as you get down to the bottom, it could be going anaerobic, where just different smells. Anaerobic is breaking it down, but it's not necessarily in the way that we're encouraging it. It's a little slower, and so that's when there's potential for maybe a nuisance So that's why one thing is, if you're in a real tight neighborhood right next to your neighbors, to do a big pile and turning it, sometimes it may be more appropriate for an urban farm, or in this case, a community garden with the light rail right behind. But even if you don't do a completely, a 3-foot high pile, you can start a pile foot high, start building it up. I'd still encourage it. It's just not going to be as fast. But it will still break down and will still build all the life and start to break it down. So just beware, it'll take a little longer. Some people, and so this is kind of geared for, say, a 1 month or a 2-month cycle that I've, food scraps and straw. Some people just throw sticks in the back of their yard for a whole year, and that's, perfectly acceptable. You're just not going to get compost very fast. It's going to take a year or more. And so next, I'm going to move to sheet composting. And this is a technique we really like. It's sometimes very appropriate if you, because you just lay the material down into the soil. This here is a community garden plot. And you can see, from square inch to square inch, we've laid these food scraps that collected from restaurants, and we're going to cover them up really well. We may, like I say, spritz a little coffee grounds if we have it. And then you can see the pile of straw here. We're going to spread it, really well. If you don't cover it really well, we really want a blanket, almost like a down blanket to cover it. If you don't cover it, you're just going to get dried vegetables, and maybe some, fruit flies. But the dried vegetables are not going to be available for the ecosystem. So we really want to cover it well with a hardy blanket, so underneath all the moisture can, stay under for the worms and the microbes and all the soil life to just work on it underneath. So here was a raised bed. We put kind of a layer of food scraps in here. Once again, we're going to cover it up well. Nobody will know. I will mention that this method, you do not remove it. You're not going to reclaim this as finished compost to put under another plant. This is what we call in situ or on site. So you're actually just building the soil on site, and just can move on to another portion afterwards. So here again, this is another example of what we've done in this bed here. We put food scraps down, and I think we spritzed it with this little mound of dirt, and then covered it well with the straw. So like nature, this builds soil from the top down. So this is more akin to what happens naturally. Indeed, in nature, I don't think a hot pile, exists. I haven't seen one yet. Big 160-degree pile steaming. And so this method, a lot of times if you have healthy soil already, lots of worms and things, it could take, less than 3 or 4 weeks for most of the scraps to disappear. But there are plenty of techniques to just go right, start planting directly into it. For instance, here, you could just dig a hole right through all of the scraps and into the dirt and plant directly in. And indeed, I've actually planted a row of seeds, right on top by pulling away the straw and putting some potting soil down and planting the seeds. And, that worked just as well. You just don't want to plant directly into the food scraps. Again, just a lesson that I've learned coming with the kitchen pail that's been, a little been on the table too long. and all, they might get mucky in the bottom. And at first I'd be like, what am I going to do with this muck? It's not probably appropriate for the garden. But actually I realized that's a smoothie for your soil. So, all of that, rinse it out, put that in the soil, put all the, put all of that in there. We don't like it so much, but your soil will greatly appreciate that. And once again, covering it up, it's not going to be, a nuisance. It's going to change consistency from what was in the bottom of your bin into the soil really quickly, immediately. It's going to soak in. It's going to not be sitting in a puddle. It's going anaerobic without oxygen. So let's see here. Whoop. Worm composting. We encourage worms. We love to work with worms. They're the secret to healthy soil. So, what goes through a worm comes out worm castings, which is, the perfect nutrients for your plants. So if you can get your soil just teeming with worms, there you go. So a lot of times, I know a lot of people that keep worms in their office, office space, under their desk, or in their kitchen, which is all, wonderful. That red wigglers are the typical worm that you use for composting. But as well, when you are sheet composting, for instance, we're really encouraging, you're feeding the worms. So in that instance, we consider a sheet compost job that is simply a free range worm farm. So the worms are going to find it. They're going, if you stop feeding them there, they're going to leave and find another place for them. But essentially, I'm always feeding my worms, so that they're just continually. It's a continual worm habitat that I'm looking for. So here's another way to do this. In one of the gardens at one of the community gardens, someone dug a little 5-gallon bucket with holes into their garden, and they're throwing their food scraps in here. Once again, I would say throw some straw on top just to mitigate any nuisances. But the worms are able to go in and eat and then leave and fertilize your garden. So we're just cultivating those conditions for healthy worm habitat. So those are the main techniques that we like to use. And I will remind you, compost happens. I encourage you to one way or the other, a combination of both ways. Make a small pile and start building it, but like I've said, may not get hot and steamy and break down as fast. But either way, it's going to be building life in your soil, and will be material for the regenerative material to build a healthy landscape. Your compost, it's not going to look like the bags that come from Home Depot. We actually don't get that. We have to screen it. And you actually, during that screening, I heard when I was in New York at a compost conference, I heard the head of New York City Compost saying, every time you screen it, you lose a lot of the biology. And so, the less you can screen it, the better. So finished compost, we have to screen 3-4 times to get leaves or twigs or the occasional twist tie out of there. But you're always going to see, say, paper towel bits. They really have to be in the middle just to be composting. So anything that's on the periphery is just going to be out either in the sun, not composting, or leaves, or even I've had people say, oh, there's still a little banana peel that I can recognize in there. When's this going to be done? Well, what I say is just go into your garden with it. Start feeding the ecosystem. Let the bugs and the birds finish off that banana peel. the water and moisture in there is just going to, enhance it. So, finished compost to me is a very processed, highly processed technique. So, this way to just put it down is, less processed and more natural. Techniques for healthy soil. So regenerative, you may have heard me use regenerative without defining it. It's a very fashionable buzzword, but to me, it means three things. One, they're sustainable, real generally. Sustainable is, kind of what goes in and comes out. So, the amount of energy goes in, could come out, whereas regenerative is actually building up. So we need to not sustain our ecosystem, but really build it up. Two, regenerative agricultural techniques, which have been developed over the last 15 or 20 years, which are in reaction to conventional agriculture. And so those are, generally, I will actually go over some of them, but they're, techniques in specifically. And then regenerative matter. So your food scraps and compost is the regenerative matter that we need. 5 pounds of this with, a seed, an acorn, or, a tomato plant, and a tomato seed, and the ecosystem could yield, tens and hundreds or even thousands of pounds of carbon. So that's how 5 pounds of carbon can yield and turn into much more. So that's, I think I like to think of our food scraps in that way. Once again, let's see, we've covered some of these. I like to protect our soil. So here is an uncovered soil. So this to me is going to be dry and dead and without a lot of life, especially after a few weeks in the summer. Whereas I always like to have our landscape covered with an armor of straw or wood chips, leaves, even cardboard, something to keep the moisture in and the heat off of it. And so it also keeps the weeds away, keeps the weeds down, and the moisture in. So another regenerative technique is no-till. So unlike the centuries of tilling that we've done through, with our agriculture, we're trying to rewind that and not till and leave the top layers of soil intact and really protect them. So just the last thing once you have a healthy soil, you want to do is say turn it upside down 6 inches. So your 6 inches is now staring into the sun. You're losing a lot of water, carbon, and just life right there. So we don't like to do a lot of worms. I have worms in there. The last thing I want to do is dig into them and hurt them. So perennial plants, also we like to have the plants which are taking the energy from the sun and putting, exuding sugars and carbohydrates to the roots. So it's essentially feeding the soil. So we always either perennial plants, or you could do a succession of plants. So you pull out one tomato or put pepper, put something in while you're pulling something out. But, generally not to have, kind of the opposite of a bare field that has nothing on it. We don't like that. We'd like to have something feeding the soil. Really quick, let's see, store water. So all your healthy soil can store a lot of water. We like to turn, when possible, on your houses, your gutters could be turned so that the water is not running off, down the street through the gutters and directly into the river, but onto your landscape to, saturate the soil, not saturate, but to let it absorb in. And so at my house, I put all of the water that comes off of the roofs back into the soil. That just spreading it out, and you just want to basically keep it on your landscape as long as possible. So, permaculturists will have berms or swales, or, kind of a meandering path, which could help it. And so just rain barrels are encouraged, but your soil can hold a lot more than just the rain barrel. So a 10 by 10 tough shed, 1 inch of rain on that yields 62 gallons. So that's roughly 155-gallon water barrel. But if you have a larger roof than a tough shed, and we have more rain than that, there's just going to be much, significantly much more water available to your ecosystem for your landscape. And we really just for Sacramento and the region, we want to keep this water on our landscapes and available to the trees and the insects and the birds, etc. So just more practices, applying compost. So it's an inoculant, compost itself. So I don't want to put it directly out in the sun. I want to slip it under my straw, or to keep it alive and keep it moist. So generally, I think I'm not so concerned with NPK values, which are the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that you'll see on compost bags, but really just trying to build soil biology, which will provide all those nutrients naturally. These are, let's see, I will mention it, these are organic techniques. So we're trying to build life. So we discourage pesticides, herbicides, and artificial synthetic fertilizers. Those do not enhance or cultivate the soil life, but rather the plant itself. So they're going directly to the roots to feed the roots, and they're actually bad for like worms and the plant, the fungi and other plant life around them. I think it dehydrates. Don't quote me on that, but I've heard some studies that it just does not, discourages soil life. So that almost coming toward the end, just removing lawns when possible. We would much rather than scraping off the top 6 inches of soil, which is carbon, soil life, and moisture, we'd much rather go on top of it. If we can, add scraps, add cardboard, add wood chips, all of that would keep, all that material out of the landfill and further build your landscape. So once again, when we don't really encourage those like deserts, we don't want desertscapes, obviously. We want to avoid desertification, but a rock landscape or a landscape that is made to not have any water is not really going to be helpful to our ecosystem. We'd rather see landscapes that hold all this water, and in the trees and in the bushes and in ground covers, rather than a rock garden that needs no water. That's less helpful for our ecosystem. So in conclusion, I just encourage you to embrace nature and the microbial life that is in our gut. So the soil biome, the gut biome, these microbes also, hats off to them. They make our wine and our cheese and our kimchi. And so just to appreciate and help cultivate them in your day-to-day life. And so this, just by growing healthy soil, which is the foundation for all this life, we can build just pollinator gardens that encourage bees and butterflies, native gardens, which are good. For instance, what is a ginkgo biloba tree is from Asia, and it harbors, say, 5 pests. they say. So it's basically pest-free. So people, if you want a pest-free environment, you might go for one of those. Whereas an oak tree, which is native, can harbor 2,000 insects. Lots of butterflies and things that I'm not an insect guy, but and the point being is we need more insects. We need to build up this life, and so that if you are in a position to put in an oak tree, which is a keystone species, because it cultivates so many of our local ecosystems. It encourages it. So also, almost lastly, friends of compost. So roly-poly bugs, you're going to see those. Fruit flies, so they're decomposers. If we don't necessarily want them, so as I said, cover it really well, but just to know that they're not spoiling your compost. They're just trying to get at it. As well, black phoebe bird, which is actually pictured here. You might get one of these as a pet in your backyard because they're fly catchers, and they'll come and take the little fruit flies off the top in midair. They're wonderful. You can hear them squeaking in the background. And then BSFL, which is black soldier fly larva. These are little grubs that actually the zoo, Sacramento Zoo, will buy them from me for their lizards and birds, and they're just they're considered a great find just because they're so nutritious and plentiful. Well, they're little grubs that you may find in your compost, and just to not be scared, they're about a half-inch. I want to just warn you, because sometimes I can imagine if you found 50 of them crawling in there, you'd be like, what is this? And oh my goodness. But they're very friendly. When they turn to flies, they lose their mouths. They're not going to chomp on your vegetables or anything. So just don't be afraid of that. I guess let's see. So this is the last slide. So I encourage you as the foundation, to build soil as the foundation of our ecosystem, which we can grow our own, foods and medicines, and essentially make your landscape into a carbon sink that can full of life. So together, we can sequester carbon to build healthy living soils that regenerate our ecosystem and build climate resiliency in our region. So thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. I do on my website here, I think I have a little section, Composting Climate, with some resources that some of the books and sources that I go to, as well as my email right here. And I welcome all questions, calls, and if you have a space and you would like our services, please reach out. So thank you.